Today, I'm delighted to welcome Mikael Wornoo, one of the founders of TechWolf, back to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Mick, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you on. Last time you joined me was all the way back in 2021, and I think I spoke to Andreas, the CEO at TechWolf, a year later. So, what have you been up to since? What have TechWolf been up to in those last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed, right? In a way, a lot of things stayed the same as well. So we're still an AI company now. We get to say that we were really early on the AI train. We still help organizations understand the skills of their workforce at scale. I'd say the number one thing that has changed is just the general level of awareness around AI. People want to use AI in HR. The applications of AI in HR are massive. Second big thing is we did a massive Series B, one of the biggest rounds in HR tech. For the first time ever, ServiceNow, Workday, and SAP invested together. And I moved to New York. So a lot of things have changed. We got a lot of awesome customers that we added to the Wolf Pack. And so a lot of good things happening on the TechWolf side.
That's great. And we're going to dig into a lot of that over the next sort of 40 minutes or so. Actually, interesting you said about how HR has really kind of matured around using AI. So we at Insight 222, we're publishing some research next week on December the 9th, our People Analytics Trends research. And we dug in a little bit to the AI piece. So number one, and again, we'll probably talk about this, a lot of the work in AI in HR is being driven by the People Analytics teams. And number two, we asked people how long they've been using AI in HR. So 350 companies participated. And just over 60% said they'd only been using it for a year. So I think the kind of launch of ChatGPT has kind of triggered
100%.
some adoption in HR. Now we're still quite early in HR, but and as you said, you're kind of early to the party at TechWolf with using AI, which leads us, I think, to the next thing. So obviously, you mentioned that you're working with SAP and Workday as investors as well. And TechWolf has gained some great investment recently. As you said, two of those investors are SAP and Workday. Tell us a bit more about this. What does this mean for TechWolf today, and what does it mean for TechWolf tomorrow?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm most proud of is these are massive companies with massive AI teams. They're working on this, and yet they decided to partner with TechWolf to invest in TechWolf. So I think it's a testament to the fact that we're doing something amazing, that we cracked a really hard problem. And so we were quite early in using AI to understand massive amounts of data. And so I think ultimately it will really benefit our joint customers, right? A lot of these platforms now have skills functionality, and those platforms need high quality data, and TechWolf provides that high quality data. So I'm super excited to start building and essentially really proud of what we have built already. The platforms now have access to high quality skill data in a seamless way. So for the end user, HR managers, and the employees, it's just a better experience overall.
And high quality skills data is what it's all about, isn't it, Mick? We had Sandra Laughlin on the podcast a couple of episodes ago from EPAM Systems, and EPAM have been a skills-based organization for 30 years. So they're definitely an outlier there. And she was explaining the foundation of everything is having good skills data. You can't personalize learning, you can't recommend gigs, you can't do all the things that we want to do with skills unless you've got good quality data. And that's the problem that you help organizations solve, isn't it?
100%. And the way we look at skills data is on the supply side and the demand side. So on the supply side, you really want to understand what skills your employees have. And that's really hard to do as soon as your organization has a few dozen employees. On the demand side, you want to understand what are the skills related and required to the jobs in my company. Like, what skills do people need to be successful? And what we'll see is that organizations will either do it in a very reactive way. Let's say when there's a restructuring, then typically a consultant comes in, costs millions of dollars to get a snapshot, a very static snapshot on your skills requirements and the skills you have in the organization, and then that disappears. But getting that at scale in a continuous way, that's the really hard part. And especially with this massive transformation or this shift towards a skills first or skills based way of thinking, skills based talent management. Those are two fundamental data points or data sets that an organization needs to be successful or to even attempt becoming a skill based organization.
Yeah, and that leads nicely to the next question, Mick. how are you seeing organizations currently leveraging and applying skills data? What are the most common ways? You talked about transformation there being one of them. Obviously, hopefully connecting it to a business priority is clearly one of them. But maybe talk about the most common ways, but maybe also any surprising ways that you're seeing companies using skills data.
So I think the cool part with skills data is you can use it in a very strategic way, or you could use it to solve very operational tactical problems. And we're seeing both. There's probably three main buckets. So workforce planning, talent acquisition, and learning and development. So skills data has a very natural fit there. So in workforce planning, we had one of our customers reduce the size of their layoff by 6% by essentially redeploying people internally instead of having to fire them and rehire them. Actually, just analyze what the transferable skills are and then redeploy them in the organization. On the talent acquisition side, and this is Workday, they managed to reduce their time to hire by 32% in their sales organization. And then on the learning and development side, we had one customer that essentially used our skill gap data to essentially create budget for a big learning transformation. So it's very hard to ask for budget without a clear definition of the problem. Our data was used to actually highlight the size of the skills gap. And so those are a few cool examples. We had one customer, one project manager, she had a talent acquisition background. She knew her way around Excel and a few other tools. She redid their entire career framework. She leveraged her talent acquisition background to essentially fill, I think, 3 VP roles. Because we had data on everybody, she was like, okay, I need to be able to find some internal candidates that fit this description. And she actually just went ahead and found them. So we worked together with her to figure out, like, okay, how can we operationalize this? How can we scale this? How can we bring this to other customers? So on a very strategic level, essentially the CTO or the heads of talent are using this to create buy-in for their decisions or for any type of investment they want to make. And then on an operational and tactical level, it's just being used to solve problems. Redoing the career framework, things that just take a lot of manual work that now are a lot easier to do with TechWolf.
That's some great examples. I mean, you mentioned, I think it was a Workday example in talent acquisition that it's reduced their time to hire. I think you said by 32% in their sales roles. Now, yes. I mean, it's not, if you've got empty sales roles, then that's having an impact on revenue. So if you can make sure you're filling the right people, getting the right people, obviously, getting the right people for those roles and filling them in time, then that's going to have a pretty quick impact on your revenue as well. So that's really solving a business challenge there.
100%, and that's the second thing we're seeing, and it's also something that we try to push to our customers, like lead with a business problem. A skills project cannot be an HR project. So we try and sit down with the business, and it's typically R&D or IT, sales or operations, essentially functions that inherently have very pressing skills problems. When you approach a business leader saying, hey, we want to solve this problem with data, they're actually quite open to have the conversation. They're typically not open to say, oh, we want to redo the way we're doing talent management for reason XYZ. If we're going in and actually solving a problem with data and they don't have to do anything, that's a completely different conversation. So it's a combination of knowing where to look, both on the HR side, like what processes are going to be the most impactful for us to address, but also what functions. An IT function is another good example. Inherently, if you look at the way work is organized in an IT organization, they do sprint planning. They essentially allocate work based on skills. They have a very natural match with the idea of skill tracking, skill mapping, and then using that to match work to people.
And actually, you can help companies get to the skills data quite quickly as well, can't you? I mean, literally within a couple of weeks. So if you've got a business problem, think, how can we get the data for that? You can potentially, you can help them quickly.
100%. I'd say HSBC is probably the best example. More than 200,000 people. They attempted doing this multiple times in pockets of the organization. We were the only ones that were actually able to do it at scale in a couple of weeks. Although it took a little bit longer than with most customers because it is a very complex organization, we were able to deliver. And that's typically where a lot of skill projects fail. So one, because it's inherently cross-functional, it's almost inherently an AI and a data project, and that's not necessarily realized. Two, there's just so much more complexity once you start thinking about doing this at a global level. It's relatively easy to do it in a pocket in the organization, in a one-off type of way. Doing it at scale in a way that is repeatable, that's the hard part.
And that's the key thing, isn't it? You're getting that skills data, not just from HR systems, not just from HRISs or learning systems or talent acquisition systems. You're getting them from business systems as well.
Yeah, 100%. And in a way, a good way to think about this, we look at the work you are doing and the work you have done. Also, in a way, what you are learning. If you combine those three, you get a really good sense of the skills people have. And you need, in a way, you need those three to solve real business problems. You can get to a roughly accurate picture quite quickly. Let's say if you want to make a workforce planning decision, you quickly want to know if people can be redeployed. But if you want to make your insights and your data relevant for the business, you also need access to business data. And oftentimes, HR leaders underestimate how much data there actually is about the skills of people in various forms. But it's not in HR systems. But the business has lots of process mapping documentation, lots of tools, lots of data sources that are untapped. And so a big part of what we do when engaging with the customer is trying to figure out what are the data sources that are easy to access and that will essentially give us a lot of bang for our buck.
Mick, you mentioned in introduction you've recently moved to the US from Belgium, and I wonder, do you see a difference in the way the US approaches skills versus European in here in Europe?
I think more broadly there's just a massive difference in how the US approaches technology versus Europe. I think business is inherently more competitive here, so people are inherently more motivated to try out new things to get ahead. So that's something you really feel here. And then you have, I'd say, the translation towards HR. So obviously you see that in HR technology as well. People are just more open to trying new technology. But the idea of skills first hiring, the idea of the skill-based organization, it emerged here. What I see and feel here in the US, like everybody agreed, yes, this is a better way of managing talent. How do we actually do that? It's in the US, it's not why skills, it's how skills, and why TechWolf compared to another vendor. In Europe, there's still a lot of education. So I'd say the overall approach to like working with technology vendors is a bit more mature, a bit more sophisticated. At the same time, the way a European business thinks about partnering is really in that sense, in partnering. So it takes a little bit longer to get going, but once you are working together, they really approach it as a long-term partnership. So every region has upsides and downsides, but I do see a big difference in the way U.S. businesses interact with technology.
And I mean, a potential hypothesis there. I mean, certainly we see it in Site 222. The US is a much more mature market when it comes to people analytics. It's not that the most advanced companies in the US are ahead of the most advanced companies in Europe. That's not the case. But there's just more companies doing people analytics in the US at a kind of mid to advanced level. And I know from speaking to you and Andreas and your team in the past that one of the key people that you interface with in an organization is the head of people analytics. And it's interesting, actually, our research, 50% of people analytics teams in the research we did last year, which was 270 odd companies, are helping their organizations on the skills-based journey. So, and I'm just interested to see what, from your perspective, who are the key people that you work with at TechWolf on this topic around skills?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, people analytics is an incredibly important stakeholder. In the beginning, I was wondering, it's like, look, we were 3 engineers essentially trying to talk to anyone who would listen. And so people analytics, they have that link to data. They were the only people that were remotely interested and remotely understood what we were doing because we were way too technical in the way we explained it. But as we started working with a lot of organizations, we did realize, okay, there is a very natural fit. If you look at engagement data, survey data, it's very similar to skills data in a way that you have very abstract data and you want to translate that to a set of insights, a set of dashboards that are useful to the business. So people analytics, especially in the larger organizations, super important. I'd say for any customer, just somebody in HR that can crunch data, that can work with data is super important, because what we want to do is essentially build a bit of a skills intelligence capability at the customer side, so they don't always have to go back to TechWolf and say, hey, we need this dashboard or we want this insight. Like, building that internal capability is super important. Just like in a people analytics function, you don't want to go to consultants every time. You want to have that internal capability. I'd say more broadly, looking at the project, executive sponsorship in HR in the business is critical. HR and the business. So having one or the other, it can work, but if you truly want to be successful, you really need both. A strong project manager and then somebody that thinks about change. It can be the project manager. It can be somebody that is dedicated to that change. I think it's maybe even a realization we had. In the beginning, we were just a data provider. We just gave data to our customers, and then we worked with them to help them figure out how to use it. But in a way, you are bringing it to the employee. You are changing a process. You are changing something. Even just using data in HR is a change. So we've become a lot more vocal about the fact that you need to think about change and communication. You need to think about the marketing of the project, the packaging of the project to get people excited. Because otherwise it will be branded as just this thing HR is doing. So we try to be very mindful and intentional about how the project is being perceived by anybody else that is outside of HR.
I think you've mentioned 4 elements of running a successful skills project that are really important. Number 1, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? Proper business problem definition around it, and don't be afraid that if that's a specific function or specific country, it could be the technology function, for example, in a country, could be sales, whatever it is. 2, get a business sponsor involved, particularly if you're early on the skills journey, I guess, because you ultimately you need that, because providing insight's one thing, but you want to try and get through to action. 3, involve your people analytics team. And 4, I think a really important element that you talked about there was communication and change management as well, to drive it through to outcomes. Is there any other elements that you would say that as an organization you would want to include to running a skills project to make it successful?
Probably the mindset. I think it's very easy to essentially try and boil the ocean. It's like, okay, every process needs to be skills-based, or we are going to start skills-based recruitment for everybody. While in many organizations, especially if you look at it from the business's perspective, like, this still needs to be proven. Like, why change if this is not going to have a massive difference? So in the startup world, something they often say is your product needs to be essentially 10x better than the incumbent for people to even want to consider change. And it's something like that design thinking mindset, that product oriented or based mindset, also really important for HR. So really understanding that you're essentially trying to start a massive change in the way you're doing HR. So you need to prove value first. And the mindset should be, how can we prove value first and quickly? Everything else can wait. Everything else can come later. And too often it's seen as this thing for HR, by the business, and by HR. So the mindset about why you're doing this, how you're doing this, is super important. Probably the most important thing. If everybody is going in there thinking about how can we solve a true problem, and how do we keep going until we have solved a true problem, and how are we intellectually honest with ourselves and say, look, if let's say skills-based hiring in a particular function doesn't really make a difference in our finance department, but makes a massive difference in sales, then why should we try and go for a one-size-fits-all approach?
That makes a lot of sense. Is that so? Even if every organization, probably won't be every organization, but even if every organization becomes skills-based, not every role in the organization needs to necessarily be skills-based. And it's all about what you said there. That prioritization piece is really important. Go where the value is. I think again, back to the podcast episode a couple of weeks ago with Sandra, focus on the roles that are closest to your P&L, maybe, to start off with.
I like that a lot.
Because then you can show the impact as well, which is important for this, because it's not easy, is it? As you said, it isn't. It's not for the faint-hearted. That's why it's so important to link it to business priorities as well, and understand how you're going to actually measure the outcome. Those examples you gave earlier, you were talking about the actual business outcome that all those initiatives are having. So, companies need to be mindful of that when they're getting started on this. What I was going to so let's flip it on its head a bit. We've talked about what you need to be successful. Where do you see organizations fail when it comes to skills?
Not doing all the things I spoke about. You mentioned it's not easy, and I think it's not easy, especially when you try to do everything at once. For TechWolf, the way we approach a skills project is as a data project first. We try to go from data to insight to action. And so fundamentally, what you're initially trying to do is either highlight a problem, do some diagnosis of some form, using skills data. Because essentially, what are you doing? Essentially, you have some precision on what it is your people do. And either that helps you retain your best performers, that helps you recruit in a better way, that helps you provide training in a way that is more personalized. Not doing that, not having that design thinking mindset is probably the killer. Getting too excited, trying to essentially solve everything with technology. Technology is one aspect of this, but you need to have your ducks in a row. Just as a project management or PMO organization, for this to be truly successful. I'd say thinking that technology will solve your problem automatically is probably also one of the key reasons. I'd say another one, and this is related to what I've said, but it can very easily turn into a politically charged project. It is inherently cross-functional. You're going to touch on departments in HR that are inherently siloed in most organizations. So not being super mindful about how you're going to interact with the complement team, the talent team, the learning team. That's just a recipe for people digging in their heels, not cooperating. And so we've had projects where somebody was exceptionally successful, but like the inherently political nature of a transformation like that in HR wasn't necessarily properly taken into account, and that makes it hard to truly scale, even though you have the tangible business impact.
And as you said, I like though you kind of look at it from a data perspective, and so the business problem from one of the examples you gave was we need to do a company reorganization, and what the data helped to identify is where you could redeploy people. From one part of the organization that was maybe going to be reduced to another part of the organization where those skills were required. As you said, rather than doing what organizations typically do, they lay people off in one part of the organization while they're hiring in another part. So that helps them be a better employer, but it also helps them actually, the time to productivity for those people is probably going to be less than hiring people externally, and it's a lot cheaper. As well. So yeah, I mean, as you said, the data provided the insight and led to the action on that. So no, I like that. Then if we think, Mick, about the capabilities that make an effective skills team. So we've talked a little bit about the business and people analytics as well. But again, in your experience at TechWolf, delivering these projects to companies, all over the world, big companies as well. What are the roles and skills that you would say are essential to effectively execute a skills initiative?
I think it depends on the end user. So as mentioned, you can have a strategic skills project where essentially you're trying to use data to do decision making in HR. You could have HR as a team, the recruiters or the instructional designers as an audience, or you could have the employee. So depending on the end user, the makeup of the project is going to be a little bit different. But fundamentally, as mentioned, you need a strong project manager, somebody who's responsible for change, somebody who has data analytics and data analysis skills, and then you need sponsorship. I think that can really be it. But all the things that we spoke about need to be taken into account. So for me, the change manager, the person responsible for communication, should also think about how are we interacting with our peers in HR. How are we communicating across? How are we communicating up? How are we communicating to the employees? So I'd say the easiest thing to do in a skills project is using data to understand the workforce, to understand a skill gap, to see whether or not you have let's say, the sufficient adoption of AI skills or another set of critical skills. Then the second easiest thing to do is essentially solving skills management for employees. We have a bunch of customers, IQVIA being one, where the main thing they wanted to do is essentially solve skills management for thousands and thousands of employees. Like, how can we actually ensure our employees keep their skills up to date in a way that is easy for them? So we've built an integration with Teams. It's integrated with their learning system, with Workday. So it's seamless. People came to the project team and said, "Hey, it's really awesome that you can infer my skills. Like, I didn't even realize it was going to be that good." And people actually start engaging with their skills profile. I think engagement with people's talent profile went like plus 400% or something like that. So that's a massive number. The hardest thing to do is probably changing an HR process because it touches on so many things. So before attempting that, either you need a very strong business case, like you need to have your project team lined up, and then change management is going to be super critical. You probably need a few more people. You need your liaison in the business. You probably need the mirror of your project team you have in HR in the business for that to be truly successful.
And again, I know that at TechWolf, we've talked about you're working with people analytics teams, you're working with talent acquisition teams, you're working with learning teams and other teams within the broader HR sphere. How do those functions use TechWolf differently? Because I think one of the enablers of TechWolf is it's not a platform, is it? You're effectively which I think is probably quite helpful because there's lots of platforms that people have got within their HR tech landscape at the moment. You can really, I don't know, maybe explain a little bit about what TechWolf does, because just for people who are listening that are new to this, perhaps.
100%, and I'd say we're the only vendor that does this. We're unique in this, in the fact that we didn't want to build yet another HR tech platform. There's plenty of platforms out there, so we looked at the market. And what was very clear was that there is mainly a data problem. And so to solve a data problem, you don't necessarily need to build another platform. We focused on building really good AI that could just analyze data from various systems, that could grab data out of various systems, and then essentially solve that skills data problem. And so TechWolf is API first, and what that means is we make connections easy. So you know how your LMS doesn't talk to your core HR system, doesn't talk to your talent marketplace. Every customer struggles with that, and so that's what we solve when we say we're API first. We're connection first. We make it easy to connect, and so we want to make it easy for customers to essentially not have to think about a very technological and operational problem. But then the question is, how do our customers interact with something that essentially lives behind the scenes? So there's the direct integrations with the employee-facing platforms, think the Workdays and the SAPs, but also the Visiers and the Crunchers, so the people analytics platforms. We integrate directly with Power BI, Tableau, the analytic systems, if you will. We have our own admin console. So essentially, there's various ways of interacting with the data, or interacting with TechWolf. What is always front and center for us is essentially how do we make sure it's just easy for the customer? Like they already made a bunch of investments in their HR tech stack. We're not coming in to replace something. We're essentially coming in to improve the ROI. With one customer, we're looking at essentially driving traffic to the learning management system by essentially improving and iterating on our skills assistant, because we found a way to let people engage with their skills profile. And the next frontier is, can we find a way to actually get people to the learning system? So there's plenty of ways of interacting with TechWolf, but the most important thing, if I zoom all the way out, is essentially building the capability in HR to analyze data, to work with data, and to get really comfortable with data. It's something we see across the board. Our customers are actually quite surprised and shocked how much more buy-in they get from their peers in the business once they start leading with data and a good story around that data.
Which is ironic because that's how every other business function
exactly
works. But it's still relatively new to many HR functions in many organizations, and new to HR professionals.
That's the opportunity, right?
That's the opportunity, yeah. And I think we can learn from other business functions, particularly like marketing, I think, and think about how they use customer data. It's really similar, not the same, but similar for us in HR using employee data to support better decisions around people, which is good for people, but also better decisions around people that are good for the business as well. So, and the two don't have to be separate.
100%. And marketing became a lot more strategic as well over
Yeah,
the years as
exactly.
they were using more data. As the ROI of marketing spent became tangible, marketing's importance in the business grew. We're seeing a very, very, very similar trend in HR. As the ROI of people investments become more clear, the importance, the relevance, and the strategic voice of HR will just increase in the organization.
You mentioned, Mick, that at TechWolf, and obviously an earlier AI company coming into this space. Everyone's talking about AI now. Well, everyone was talking about AI, but everyone really is talking about AI now. And actually, we're seeing it's not just talk; it's actually action. Based on the research that we've been doing here at Insight 222. So, with this emergence, where do you foresee the HR technology market heading, with respect to skills intelligence, but maybe generally as well?
I'd say we're already seeing this, but the advent of generative AI is completely changing how people interact with technology. So the idea of going into yet another platform to do a very limited set of workflows, I think that is going to disappear completely. You'll have one super app that is essentially going to be your interface, and that app is going to probably grab data from a bunch of other places. That will be systems of record. I think your engagement layer is going to change completely. So at TechWolf, we're also thinking about this, and there's probably two layers. You have your AI layer, the one we've been building for 6 years, that essentially is really focused on grabbing a lot of unstructured data and bringing order in that chaos. And there's a second layer that thinks about how can we interact with that data. So right now, going from data to insight to action is essentially it takes some work on the customer side. You need to crunch the data, analyze the data, ask the right questions. I think as Gen AI matures, we'll be able to go up the stack. So I think in a few months even, we'll be able to go from data to insight to prescribed action, all led by technology. And that's going to be a massive game changer because, let's face it, not that many people are super proficient in crunching data. ChatGPT and a few other tools have lowered that barrier. Everybody that essentially is brave enough can learn how to code. But I think it's going to go much further than that. Interpreting data is being codified in such a way that the insight and the action is essentially going to come very naturally out of that Gen AI layer. So I think HR tech is in for a big change. If you look at agents, because HR, a lot of things in HR are very manual and repetitive work. They're essentially prime targets for agentic AI, for agents. So I think an AI workforce in HR is going to come sooner rather than later. But ultimately, the employee will benefit, right? We're used to all these amazing tools in our life as consumer. I think the enterprise HR tech stack has some catching up to do.
Yeah, and I think it's an exciting and yet challenging time, I think, for HR professionals because, firstly, we can support the transformation, the AI transformation within the organization, good workforce planning, good skills identification, etc. We need to think about how we deliver HR programs. As you said, it's going to be the interface is likely to be very different. But we also need to think about how we upskill ourselves as well so that we are familiar with these tools so that we can, be advocates within the organization as well. So it's an exciting yet challenging time, I think. And I know next week we'll see each other at Workday Rising EMEA in Amsterdam. So what can we expect from TechWolf next? What should we be keeping our eyes and ears open for in the coming months and years? Without revealing all your trade secrets, of course.
So we have we have a big announcement coming at Workday Rising EMEA. So I won't spoil it yet. But in the coming years, I think TechWolf is gonna continue to be the market leader in AI and HR. I think the opportunity is there now. There's a general awareness in the public that AI can be a game changer, and we're seeing the traction in the market. So I think Gen AI and HR, making HR more effective is a massive market, a massive opportunity. HR is still responsible for the biggest cost in almost any workforce. So we're laser focused on essentially going after that opportunity and making our customers super happy in the process. I think for me, every time I see that we can truly move the needle, I just get genuinely happy to essentially problem solve and figure out how do we go from data to insight to action? But for TechWolf more broadly, I'd say there's a few pillars in the short term. So one, integrations, make it super easy to get started. As we mentioned, there's a wide HR tech stack, so we want to make working with TechWolf as easy as clicking a button. We want to ensure that we stay the market leader in getting skills data, because that's the hardest problem, truly understanding what people can do. And then thirdly, as mentioned, going from data to insight to action, making it super easy to actually action that data, to use that data to drive meaningful business outcomes.
So before we get to the question of the series, Mick, I'm going to, let's say we'll probably have many people listening to this episode who are either very early in their skills journey or thinking about getting started. What would be your advice to those individuals, to those companies about getting started?
So first of all, go to techwolf.com.
Well, it's not a bad suggestion.
Have a chat with the team. But I'd say on a more serious note, I can guarantee you that in your sales or IT or R&D organization, you can solve a problem with skills. So instead of trying to go big bang right away, try and sit down with somebody in the business, try to understand what people challenges they're facing, and try and figure out if having access to better data on people, if using skills as a framework for talent management would really make a difference. I think that's probably my go-to approach. Don't be afraid to pilot. A pilot needs to be big enough to be meaningful, but small enough to be manageable. But don't be afraid to pilot and just get started. It's probably the most important thing. Just start, but don't start too big. So that will probably be my main advice.
No, I think that's really good advice for this, and I've seen a lot of organizations in this space who are now quite far advanced on their skills journey. They started with a pilot. They carefully selected what that pilot was, as you said. Don't go too big, but do something meaningful that's going to have an impact. And I think the other factor, the other big factor that you talked about as well earlier, was get a business sponsor, someone that's got a problem that they want to solve and is prepared to take action. So really good. So Mick, we're going to get to the question of the series now. So this is a question we're asking everyone in this series of the podcast, which thank you to you and the TechWolf team for sponsoring. How can organizations leverage skills intelligence to make more informed decisions?
So for me, as mentioned, it's getting started. Something that we've seen with every customer is you can only truly create an internal capability around skills intelligence once you have the data, once you start brainstorming, once you start having the conversation. So I think getting started, getting your hands on the data, and just doing it is the most important thing to make more informed workforce decisions, because it's a muscle you need to train. And as you know, the first time you go to the gym, it's horrible. You're really sore, but after a while, you get used to it.
No, I think that's great advice. Just get started, because I think we do. Sometimes we're a bit dangerous in HR. We do prevaricate sometimes, and we do want to have everything in place before we get started. And sometimes you just need to get started and learn as you go a little bit, don't you? Mick, it's been a pleasure. Looking forward to seeing you next week in Amsterdam. But before we end the conversation today, can you let listeners know how they can keep in touch with you or get in touch with you, and also follow the great work that you're doing at TechWolf?
Yeah, so techwolf.com. You can reach me and team there, and then you can find me on LinkedIn, Mikael Wornoo, and I'll happily have a chat with you to see how TechWolf can help you.
That's great, Mick. Great. It's always a pleasure to speak to you and the team. And take care. I'll see you next week.
Bye. See you next week.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice, and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.